Located mostly in Wyoming, with smaller sections crossing into the states of Montana and Idaho, is where we can find the Yellowstone National Park. This area of land has a long history, far beyond that of the first Anglo explorers. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the Native Americans had settled the land where they would live and hunt. Though not all was peaceful among the four great tribes living among the land. Yellowstone was a battleground in which the Crows, the Blackfeet, the Bannocks and the Shoshones were vying for control over its resources. The Yellowstone wasn't known by that name back then either, but rather the Burning Mountains. At the time, some of the natives believed that they were incurring the wrath of an evil spirit that resided amongst the geysers, which led them to abandon the areas close by. It's not completely clear what happened that led them to this belief. Fast forward to the 1st of March 1872, this was when the US Congress established the park's boundaries and President Ulysses Grant signed it into law. Interestingly, Yellowstone was the first national park in the United States and is arguably the first declared national park in the world. The park itself encompasses over 2.2 million acres and is well known for its wildlife, geothermal features, Old Faithful geyser and its supervolcano. Because of government funding restrictions, the area declined as vandalism was on the rise and the number of poachers swelled. As a result, in 1886, a US Army cavalry company was dispatched to oversee Yellowstone and to guard its natural treasures. This cavalry company made great progress within a 10-year time span, and in 1918 they handed over the reins to the newly formed National Park Service. The park attracts over 4 million annual visitors, and while most come and go without issue, this hasn't been the case for a number of people. The specific borders of national parks tend to vary depending on the source you're reading. Through the various sources on this disappearance, some declare it as within the national park, others declare it as on the border, others 1 mile away from the border, and some 10 miles away. So make of that what you will, but given its proximity to the park, I feel it's still appropriate to be reported on here. Fran Weaver was 56 years old at the time of her disappearance from an area nearby Creekside Lodge at Yellowstone. Specifically, she had recently become the owner of the lodge, though back in the 60s it was known as Gough Creek Lodge. After acquiring the cabin, she quickly became close friends with Olive Fell, who owned a cabin approximately 15 miles away from Fran's property. The date is not precise, but at some time in January of that year, Fran made the trip to Olive's cabin, where she was staying for a while during the winter. The pair would hike together and generally loved spending time in the outdoors, and specifically the nearby national park. On the 1st of February 1960, Fran had decided to go on a solo hike towards a nearby mountain and told Olive that she would be back before dinner. Of course, Fran didn't return that day, and Olive became increasingly worried as she waited. It's not clear at what time, but thereafter Olive reported Fran as a missing person to the police. On the 4th day of the search, which was also the 4th of February 1960, the Helena Independent Record reported this. The search continued today for Mrs. Fran Weaver, 56, who has been reported missing since Thursday from a resort west of here. Sheriff Harley Kincaid and a search party Sunday covered a wide area up to the mountain snowline in 3 directions but found no trace of the woman. Mrs. Weaver was reported missing by Miss Olive Fell, an artist with whom she'd been spending the winter. Mrs. Weaver's clothing and auto were left at Miss Fell's home, said Kincaid. Specifically, law enforcement was searching the North Fork Mountains and the area leading up to it, but didn't find a trace of her. At some point during the search, it was theorized that she might have headed back to her own cabin for one reason or another. So that was searched too, but nothing was found to indicate that she'd been there. An extensive search was also conducted in the surrounding areas to the cabin, but still nothing was found. At some point, the search effort headed even further in the direction of the national park, but again it was fruitless. Now at this point, information is scarce, but to fast forward 19 days after the report on the 4th, the Billings Gazette updated with this on the 23rd. A Park County coroner's jury ruled Monday that Mrs. Fran Weaver, 56, passed away of exposure early this month, about 24 hours after she disappeared. Mrs. Weaver left the Olive Fell cabin 24 miles west of Cody in the rugged Shoshone River Canyon area. Her body was found February 7th around a quarter-mile away from Miss Fell's cabin. It doesn't appear that Fran was injured in any way and looked to have suffered from exposure, as there was nothing to indicate foul play or any third-party involvement. It's not clear precisely what the search effort looked like or how many people were involved, but it does appear that she either wasn't there or might have been missed during the initial search led by the sheriff, as it seems her direction of travel was headed towards the mountains. It's also important to note that while information is lacking from my own experience reporting on these incidents in rural or wilderness areas, search dogs are almost always deployed. Meaning that if this was the case here too, then it seems that at least initially the dogs weren't able to locate her. Though again, it's not even clear how she was found or if she was headed towards the mountain or back towards the cabin when she fell to the elements. Now let's fast forward 6 years. On the 12th of July 1966, 8-year-old Dennis Eugene Johnson disappeared in Yellowstone National Park. The Johnson family consisted of the parents, their 3 daughters and Dennis, who had planned what was supposed to be a relaxing trip to the park. However, this journey would end up being a nightmare for the family. The family themselves often made trips and spent time in the outdoors and loved being with one another. All sources indicate that all of the children had been taught basic survival skills, and Dennis had prior wilderness experience whilst tagging along on hunting trips. On the day in question, the family had driven from Canyon Junction to the northeast, where they had arranged to have a picnic together. It's not completely clear what had happened at this point. Some sources indicate that Dennis and one of his sisters were playing nearby, while others indicate that Mary, the sister in question, wandered off. But from what I can gather, it appears that Dennis and Mary wandered off from the picnic area up a nearby hill. Sources don't seem to give a specific time frame here, but it appears that shortly after the pair wandered up the hill, Dennis would return alone. It seems to me that much time can't have passed, as the parents were not concerned about their departure together. However, upon Dennis's return, he was asked where Mary had gone to, which he replied that he didn't know. According to the Oakland Tribune, the Chief Park Ranger's office reported that a younger sister wandered off when the Johnson family stopped at a picnic area along the highway 1/4 mile north of Canyon Junction Tuesday afternoon. The father and Dennis went separate directions to look for the girl. The father found the missing girl, but Dennis vanished. Specifically, it was another camper who had found Mary and had taken her to a nearby ranger station and was then brought back to the family. At this point, the father travelled in the direction of Dennis to tell him that all was well, however, he couldn't locate his son. Nervous now, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson began to search the area in an effort to retrieve their son. This search was unsuccessful, and the family appealed to other hikers and campers nearby who assisted in the search until 4 p.m. No trace of Dennis could be found, and the National Park Service were made aware of the situation. It's important to note that Dennis went missing at around an 8,000 foot elevation, and that the mountainous area is rugged, and it was suspected that Dennis really shouldn't have been able to get very far. The Corpus Christi Times gave us an indication of the search effort with their report on the 15th of July 1966, 3 days after the initial disappearance. Yellowstone National Park. No trace was found yesterday by around 50 men in a ground and air search for an 8-year-old California boy missing since Tuesday. Rangers said the search would resume Friday. Night temperatures in the park have been down to about 44 degrees. Dennis Johnson, son of Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, became separated from his family while hunting for his sister. The girl was found, but in the meantime, Dennis had vanished. The search only intensified from there, and soon over 100 employees of the National Park Service were deployed to find Dennis. Helicopters, specialist search dog teams, and professional trackers were all brought in to find him. Reports indicate that the searchers, and especially the trackers, were left baffled because they were completely expecting to find his footprints, but none were located anywhere in the area. 8 days into the search, the Lovington Daily Leader reported this. Experienced park rangers were to retrace their routes today in an attempt to find a young boy 8 days ago in the Yellowstone area. "We are still hopeful," said a ranger, but so far there have been no definitive trace of the 8-year-old. As many as 125 men have gone over the area, walking shoulder to shoulder through the forest areas and climbing along the rim of the Grand Canyon. Late Tuesday, the boy's father, 2 uncles, and his grandfather were continuing their own search for the missing lad. After 2 more days of searching, hope seemed to drain from the situation. The Logan Herald-Journal reported this: "The search was scheduled to continue today in Yellowstone National Park, where Dennis has been missing for 10 days. Park officials held little hope that they would find the 60-pound 8-year-old safe. No trace of the youth has been found by hundreds of searchers who have blanketed a 100-square-mile area since the boy was reported missing. During the time, the searchers were perplexed because nothing at all was turning up. The helicopters never made any sightings of Dennis or where he could have been, and the search dogs never picked up his scent at any point during the search, which many claimed to be unusual. Naturally, the possibility of Dennis being taken came up around a week into the search, which is roughly the time of FBI involvement into the case. The extent of their involvement is unknown, and it's not clear if they had any theories of their own. One searcher made the comment, "It was almost as if Dennis had been snatched from the face of the earth." The official search lasted for 2 weeks, but after no evidence or clues presented itself, the search was called off. Dennis's family, however, continued their own unofficial search, but they never found Dennis or any indication of where he might have gone. This trip was a disaster from the get-go. First, Dennis and Mary had somehow gotten separated before Mary went missing. Thankfully, she was then successfully located some distance away from the picnic area. Meanwhile, Dennis goes missing without leaving a footprint or even a trace behind as to where he might have gone. This was a very troubling disappearance, and there are no real answers, and in fact, we're left with almost every question unanswered. Why couldn't professional trackers locate anything to indicate where he might have gone? No footprints were in the area. The dogs never found his scent. Why? Does this indicate that he wasn't even there anymore? The general feeling was that Dennis should surely have been found, but that was obviously not the case. What happened to Dennis Johnson, and where did he go? At this point, while there are other older disappearances that have taken place in the area, let's start heading towards more recent times. At the time, 42-year-old Dan Campbell disappeared whilst on an illegal elk antler gathering trip in Yellowstone National Park. Dan was last seen on the 6th of April 1991 when his friends dropped him off with his dog at the HELLROARING Creek trailhead in Yellowstone National Park. According to BozemanDailyChronicle.com, Campbell had arranged for his girlfriend to meet him in the Jourdain area outside the park 2 days later. When he didn't show up, Tracy reported him as missing to Yellowstone and Park County authorities on the 8th of April. The authorities, alongside the park rangers, began the search for Dan almost immediately after learning about it, but failed to find any sign of him. Similar to Fran's disappearance, there is little information in regards to how the search was conducted and how many people were involved. But from my understanding, search dog teams were involved, as were helicopters, and while specifics aren't mentioned, all sources indicate that the search was extensive. While the precise date of when Dan had gotten into trouble is not known, BozemanDailyChronicle.com states that Dan travelled lightly without much gear and was accompanied only by his dog, indicating that he wasn't with anyone else at the time, nor did he plan on meeting up with anyone. They also state that a heavy spring snowstorm hit the forested plateaus around the time of his disappearance, or perhaps shortly thereafter, which of course either way will have had a negative impact on the search efforts. Almost 2 months later, on the 30th of May, the Daily Interlake reported this: 2 camps stocked with provisions had been found near where a big timber man disappeared in Yellowstone National Park's backcountry almost 2 months ago. However, the fate of Dan Campbell remains a mystery. The 2 camps were stocked with military ready-to-eat meals, chewing tobacco, tea and dried beans. Johnson said he did not know if Campbell or other antler collectors set up the camps. Foul play could be a factor in the disappearance of Campbell, Johnson said. It's not completely clear why the thought of foul play was introduced here, since no evidence had presented itself to point in that direction. However, it's worth mentioning that because the search efforts had failed and the search dogs couldn't find Dan's scent, Dan's brothers were also contemplating and later insisting on the idea that foul play must have occurred here. In an article by Deseret News, Dan's brothers stated, "If Dan's in the park, he's buried. I don't think that he's alive. How that demise came, well, I've got a lot of mixed emotions about it." Investigators of Campbell's disappearance, including the FBI and the National Park Service, say that they have absolutely no clues as to his whereabouts or his dog. "We're really not doing a whole lot at this point because we've got nothing to go on," Johnson said. "If we would come up with any new leads or information today or tomorrow, that would change." It's worth mentioning that Dan was highly experienced in the outdoors with camping and hunting, which may have contributed to their belief that he didn't simply succumb to the environment. The authorities stated that there were 3 possibilities: that he had gotten lost or had been involved in an accident, or he wanted to disappear, or foul play was involved, but ultimately no sign of Dan has ever been found. The brothers would later bring about a lawsuit against the authorities involved in the search, stating that they did not believe the investigation was conducted in a satisfactory manner, and the brothers made the claim that much of the evidence gathered at the time has been disposed of or lost. It's not clear what evidence they were referring to specifically, but the sheriff insisted that no evidence of foul play was found and instead the case remained open as a missing persons case. However, the brothers' lawyer noted that the Montana Criminal Investigation Bureau was involved in the investigations at some point, despite no one ever being identified as a suspect, and that they do not normally investigate a missing persons case. It's not clear what the extent of their involvement was or why they were involved. Does this indicate that at one point or another the authorities did think that a third party had been involved in the disappearance? It's unclear, and there's no further word on that. Sheriff Clark Carpenter, who replaced Johnson in 1998, did have a second look at the case, and his final words were, "No one was ever identified as a suspect in the case, though some horn hunters were questioned. The search teams made a tremendous attempt to find this guy, but when the leads run out, they run out." In the end, Dan, nor any trace of him or his dog has ever been found, and it's unlikely that we'll ever know what happened or where he went. Now here's another. This was a frustrating disappearance to try to research because the vast majority of links back to 2010, when this incident was unfolding, no longer work. Stuart Isaac disappeared in Yellowstone National Park back in late September of 2010. Stuart was 48 years old at the time and originated from the Republic of Palau in the Pacific but resided in Burtonsville in Maryland. Stuart made the trip to the park on September the 24th of that year, and the last person to hear from him was one of his old friends, Matsu Evans. Matsu was from Guam, and Stuart called her at approximately 3:30 AM, which was 6:30 PM her time. At the time she didn't realise it, but would later state that after thinking about it, Stuart may have been behaving odd, but didn't give any specific information as to what she meant by that exactly in terms of what was being said. Though she said that they did keep up with one another by text and email a lot, but they only occasionally made phone calls to one another. During this phone call, he did make it clear that he was travelling to the park. Stuart did in fact make it to his destination, as his abandoned car was found at Craig Pass, which is 8 miles east of the Old Faithful geyser. The area his car was sat was at roughly an elevation of around 8,300 feet and is a mountain pass located on the Continental Divide. According to strangeoutdoors.com, the small Isa Lake is located just west of the pass on the Grand Loop Road and is noted for straddling the Continental Divide and draining into 2 different watersheds: the Atlantic via the Missouri River and the Pacific via the Snake River. Stuart's car was found abandoned during a routine patrol of the parking area on the evening of September 26th by the National Park Service. A search was immediately started, but repeated ground and earth searches failed to find any clues or any sign of him. The circumstances of Stuart's disappearance remain unknown, and he did leave a note for his family early that month stating that he was going for an extended cross-country trip. The question remains, why exactly did he go on the trip? Was going missing his intention, or did something go wrong during his hike, or perhaps something else entirely? Unfortunately, the searchers never found footprints to give an indication of where he might have gone, nor did they find any trace of him thereafter. The phone call with Matsu may be a clue as to what happened, though there still isn't much to go on with that. Perhaps if Stuart was behaving oddly, could mean that there was something on his mind and perhaps planned to share with Matsu but ended up deciding against it. Or it could be that after learning about his disappearance, Matsu either recalled it incorrectly or deemed it as odd after the fact because he had gone missing without a trace. Of course, that is speculation on my behalf, and ultimately, it's not clear what happened to Stuart, and he remains missing to this day. Lastly, let's explore the final disappearance. On the 4th of June 2017, 42-year-old Mike Peterson made the trip to Yellowstone National Park by way of his girlfriend Bonnie Senger, who drove him there. Bonnie said that the morning was bright and beautiful when the pair arrived at the trailhead. Mike had planned a solo hike that day on a trail near West Yellowstone, and Bonnie was going to meet him at 6 PM so the two could dine together. Mike wasn't a stranger to the area and had hiked this trail many times, though usually took one of his sons along with him. At 9:30 AM that day, the pair shared a kiss before Bonnie got back into their car and drove away. She would later state, "I never wanted him to go alone. That always scared me, but you don't question it. I guess I just didn't know how dangerous it was." At the time, Mike was dressed in a bright orange vest and waders and had a sidearm with him, as he was well acquainted with the outdoors and its dangers, especially with his prior experiences in wilderness areas. Inside his backpack was reported to be food and bear spray. As said, Mike was very familiar with this area and knew precisely where he could find a reception on his phone, so he was texting with Bonnie frequently throughout the day. However, when Bonnie arrived at the trailhead at 6 PM, Mike wasn't there. Bonnie waited for an hour and 20 minutes when she heard 4 shots go off in the forest. She first took that as a sign that he was on his way, but when he still didn't show up, she got in the car and raced to find a signal. At this point, she phoned the sheriff's office, and at 10 PM that day is when the search began. Search and rescue teams alongside search dogs and helicopters were deployed on the trail and towards the area of the shots. Mike's body was not initially located, but 3 days into the search, Mike's body was discovered in Beaver Creek on the 7th. County Sheriff Jason Jarrett was of the opinion that Mike had fallen into the water whilst trying to head back to Bonnie. However, this is not the end of the story, and one detail seems to make the disappearance somewhat strange. When found, the authorities thought that he had simply fallen until one of them realised that some of his belongings were missing. They came to the realisation that Mike's vest and backpack were missing, so the search was on again. Approximately half a mile away from the river, they found Mike's vest with his bear spray, and nearby they found his backpack with his firearm still inside. It's not clear why Mike felt the need to abandon his equipment. According to BismarckTribune.com, during their search, rescue volunteers found Mike Peterson's belongings away from the river. It's possible Peterson encountered a bear, but tracks were never discovered. The searchers at first thought that this finding must have been a result of a bear somehow, but couldn't explain the lack of evidence as to a bear being at the scene. It's important to note that Mike's body was in good condition and they believed that he had drowned. I found it surprising that this detail was given such short shrift. Where did the 4 shots come from? Was it Mike who did that? I can find no evidence from any source that indicates it was him or otherwise. If it was Mike, why? Was there a bear nearby, or did he feel threatened by some other third party? Or was it, as Bonnie thought, a signal for one reason or another? It was also stated that Mike must have fallen into the creek as he tried to cross it, but why did he take his vest and backpack off beforehand? Surely, if he had crossed without them, there would have been no way to retrieve them from the other side. Did he believe that something was wrong so he didn't care about that? Mike was very well equipped in both his experience and gear equipped for the outdoors. It seems unlikely that he would have left his bear spray and sidearm behind if a bear was nearby. Many questions were left unanswered this one, and the circumstances are not clear at all. Was there more to this incident than meets the eye? What do you think? Thank you for watching. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. And if not, then feel free to leave a dislike, I'm just looking for your honest opinions, so do share your thoughts. And if you enjoy hiking or camping, then please do put the extra effort in to be careful. I'd also just like to say a special thank you to my patrons who keep the channel moving forwards, so thank you very much for your support. I hope that you've had a great day or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you next time. Peace.